Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our last MAR Talks Revolutionary Mothering interview. I'm Carrie Cavers, founder of Moms Against Racism Canada, and over the last month, I've had the privilege and honor to interview some truly inspiring humans. Revolutionary mothering means to challenge the status quo, to protect and nurture the vulnerable, to build up communities that are systematically torn down. The Indigenous peoples here and what is now known as Canada have been stewarding this land time immemorial. Their love and care for this earth, for each other, is revolutionary mothering. I'm humbled by the opportunity to live and raise my children here as an uninvited guest in the territory of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples of the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations. In MAR, we're educating moms and those in mothering roles in anti-racism, cultural competence, and decolonization so that we can work together to dismantle racism. And in the spirit of reconciliation, I recognize I have so much more to learn, but I'm committed to fighting anti-Indigenous racism and supporting Indigenous sovereignty. And today I'm joined by a co-host, MAR Healthcare Advocacy Co-Team Lead and previous Revolutionary Mother interviewee, Cynthia Barnaby, for a very special interview with a remarkable individual. I will now pass the mic for this interview takeover. Over to you, Cynthia.
Hi, Carrie. So as Carrie's introduced, my English name is Cynthia Barnaby, and my traditional Haida name is Guga Jung. And I'm here today with my mother, which I thought was pretty fitting because we're talking about revolutionary mothering. And we are super excited to be here for this interview. We want to start by acknowledging that we are on the unceded traditional and ancestral lands of the Coast Tsimshian people. We want to recognize that they've been stewards of this land and caretakers of this land for time immemorial. It's my honor to interview our guest today, someone that I deeply admire, Dr. Cindy Blackstock. She's a member of the Gitxsan First Nation. Cindy is honored to serve as the executive director of First Nations Family Caring Society and a professor at McGill University School of Social Work. She has over 30 years of experience working in child welfare and Indigenous children's rights and has published more than 75 articles on topics related to reconciliation, Indigenous theory, First Nations child welfare, and human rights. Cindy was honored to work with First Nations colleagues on a successful human rights challenge to Canada's inequitable provisions of family and child and family services and failure to implement Jordan's principle. This hard-fought litigation has resulted in hundreds of thousands of services being provided for First Nations children, youth, and families. She recently received served on the Pan American Health Commission on Health Equity and Inequity, and fundamentally believes that culturally based equity is fundamental to meaningful reconciliation. Cindy is frequently cited in the company of the Caring Society's reconciliation Am-bear-rister, Spirit Bear, engaging children in meaningful actions to implement the TRC Calls to action. And just recently, Cindy has she was recognized in Maclean's as one of the most powerful Canadians in 2021. Congratulations. Hi, Cindy.
Hi.
Thank you so much for sharing your time with us today. I wanted to give you an opportunity to also acknowledge the lands that you're on today.
Sure. So Mary the Bear, I saw that Carrie had a bear, so I had to bring out our Mary the Bear, who is Spirit Bear's mom. And I are joining you from unceded Algonquin territory here in Ottawa. So we're just a few blocks from Parliament, and that's a good location because we like to keep our eye on the government for all of you to talk down. That's part of our job, Mary and me.
Awesome. So we we are asking each one of our interviews the same 3 questions. So we want to start off with the very first question. And what does revolutionary mothering mean to you?
You know, I think it really means just really following the advice that an elder once gave to me. He said, Never fall in love with the Caring Society. Never fall in love with your business card. Only fall in love with the children, because there may come a day when you have to sacrifice both those things for them. You know, all of us have different jobs. We can be in journalism, we can be educators, but the one job that we all have, regardless of what we do, is to stand up for kids. That's our job. Job number one as an adult. And it's been a privilege to me to see so many role models from so many nations and many non-Indigenous women and girls and LGBTQ plus people who have been standing up for these children over the years. And I just try to do my part in walking in their shadow.
That's awesome. The next question is, in what ways do you practice revolutionary mothering? So in your personal life, and then also in within your organization.
Well, one of the things we really believe is that First Nations children are sacred and they matter. And there is no excuse for giving them less because of who they are. And that has to end. That federal government apartheid service delivery system going back to Confederation is doing a dishonor to these children and to their families. It was really clear when we first really saw it in stark contrast back in 2000 that someone needed to do something. And this gets back a little bit to your first question. And I knew something needed to be done, and I was absolutely clear that I was not the person to do it. I thought there has to be someone out there who knows more than I do, who can do a better job than I can. And so I should just wait around and wait for them to appear. And then I remembered a book of poetry that my aunt gave me. And inside there's a poem by Patrick Overton. Maybe you've heard it. It's called Faith. And it says, when you step across that place where light leads into darkness, faith is knowing that there's something solid to stand on, or you'll be taught to fly. And when I stepped across that place and really decided that maybe I should do what I could to end these inequalities, and I stepped across the other side, what I realized is that I wasn't alone as I had feared I was, that there are many people who came before me and many people with me now who we were going to take this journey on together. And what was really clear to me is that these First Nations children and young people were going to get equitable services. The only question is, how embarrassed was the government of Canada going to be when we had to do it? Was it going to be voluntary, or was it going to be by legal order? It turned out to be by legal order. And that's something we're committed to do. Sometimes governments can't be relied on to do change just because it's the right thing. And that's where everybody in the public comes in. And that's why we at the Caring Society have 7 free ways for everybody to be a part of making a difference. And when the federal election happens and people knock at your door, you ask them, what is your party going to do to ensure culturally based equity for First Nations, Métis, and Inuit children? If they can't answer that question, tell them they don't get your vote.
That is amazing, and absolutely, I love that you're able to let us know too, about our decision makers and keeping people accountable to equity when it comes to Indigenous children, because I think that that's something that's lost on some people, understanding how our children are our future, and how as Indigenous people that's where we put so much energy, so much love, and especially with history within Canada, with residential schools, with 60 Scoop and all these things, and now the Millennial Scoop, which is basically what the work that you're working in. Really, really important work. So the last question is, what advice do you have for those wanting to be allies and dismantlers of racism?
I think number one is to realize that you do have to step across that place where light leads into darkness. Every one of us has a responsibility, and often it's our own insecurities that hold us back. There's another piece, though, is that it takes discipline to really, and self-management of yourself if you're going to be involved in long-term advocacy to address systemic discrimination. I have really been taught by the children and by elders that you cannot defeat systemic racism with anger and with tears. The only way you can defeat systemic racism is with love. to do a movement that where you fall in love with the children, as the elder said, that means that you're more interested in doing right than being right. That you hold yourself accountable to the evidence about what is actually going to make a difference, and you change course if it turns out that you're wrong. That you work on the authority of people. You don't just assert a power. The group has to give you that authority, and it's theirs to take away at any time. And no matter how hard things get when you're standing in the winds of that discrimination, you must act with dignity. You cannot bring an indignity to the children and families that you're working with by being angry, by acting out in disrespectful ways. You have to hold that line of integrity. And the other piece that's really important is when you're standing up for human rights, you have to care about everybody's human rights, not just human rights for people who are like you or for the group that you're privileged to work with. A human right is a value across. And so when we see racial discrimination happening to others, we have to show up. We have to show up in that, because racial discrimination towards anyone is an affront to all of us, just like Martin Luther King said. He was really right about that piece. So we must stand together. The other thing that I think is really important, and it's a practical consideration, is that when you're going after racial discrimination, avoid going after the symptom. So, and avoid calling for an official procedure. If you call for something like an inquiry, the government will give you that. There's been tons of inquiries done on the inequitable federal services that are provided on reserve. They aren't afraid of another report. They know it's another couple of days of bad news and they move on. What we need to do is keep our focus on the end result, the children. And that's why at the Caring Society, we say, we're here so that First Nations children get a fair chance to grow up safely in their families, get a good education, be healthy and proud of who they are. And we will use a whole variety of mechanisms in order to get there. But we're not going to be satisfied with a procedural mechanism that doesn't impact children on the ground in positive ways that they and their families say are positive. Not that I say are positive, but they say, you know what, this really made a difference for me. That's really super important in any kind of activism. And the other thing is, don't quit too early. So many people quit so early, right? And they might think that, having a year or two under their belt, they've tried everything they can. This litigation has been going on now for over 14 years, and we're not done yet. If we would have given up, I think that we would have really sent the wrong message to these children. And don't be afraid of retaliation by governments and corporations. We were retaliated against. We lost all of our government funding. We're the only national Indigenous organization that receives no government contribution agreements. We survived because people saw that we had the courage to stand up for the kids. And people at the time told me, you're nuts because you're going to lose this organization. It's the only organization out there. And I said, well, you might be right, because that is effectively what's happened to every First Nations, Métis, and Inuit group who's taken on Canada. All their funding gets cut and they disappear. But I said, look, if the only message I can send these kids is that I love you enough to stand with you, then that is more important to me. I do not want to keep an organization funded that somehow allows for this discrimination to continue. And there's great groups out there called Frontline Defenders and others to help you deal with those retaliatory attempts by governments, corporations, or others in ways that do bring dignity to the movement, that make sure that you're not the victim, that you keep the eye on the ball, which is on the children and families in my case. So those are just a few ideas on how to kind of keep it on track. We all have to act. Human rights are things that you can't violate human rights to stand up for human rights. You have to be centered in your values and conduct yourself with dignity and honor. And because movements are based on love, you can do fun things like to hang out with teddy bears and do that kind of stuff too, right? It's a lot more fun than just, getting a bunch of angry people with a blowhorn.
I absolutely love that. I'm the whole time that you're speaking, I'm really trying to keep my composure because there's so much of what you're talking about resonates and is, very much steeped in Indigenous values of, walking gently and about having authenticity all the way through the work that we're doing. We don't need to hurt other people in order to stand up for ourselves and our children, and keeping ourselves in a heart-centered place that will continue to be fueled by spirit and by good energy to keep this movement going forward, and that it can stand the testament of time. I just wanted to end by, we wanted to take this moment to thank you on behalf of all of the Indigenous families across Canada, especially the children, for having the courage, the tenacity, and the fortitude to speaking up in the face of discrimination and around systemic racism and in its highest form. We want to thank you and acknowledge the trail that you've blazed for recognizing our innate ability and sovereign rights to care for our own children in our own communities on our own land, and their rights to equitable or equity in service provision. Lastly, we want to say a huge hawa. So thank you in Haida or Willalan in Mi'kmaq for granting us this privilege today to interview you as part of the Revolutionary Mothering series and fulfilling one of our dreams in connecting with my dream in connecting with you about this subject that is so near and dear to our hearts. If you want to learn more about Dr. Blackstock and the work that she's currently doing, you can head over to the First Nations Caring Society website at www.fncaringssociety.com. And again, we want to say thank you to Cindy for all the revolutionary mothering that you do. And the world needs your radical acts of love.
Thank you.
Thank you.